Live now. Quick cursing, everybody. Welcome to the 10th episode of the TSSI series. And we're looking at, again, Andrew Kleiman's Reclaiming Marx's Capital. And we're on to chapter number 8. We have a reasonably full audience here tonight. We just had Alex drop off. He's gone into the chat to kick some ass there. We've got Lexi.
Hello.
There's Lexi, and we also have Emmanuel and Aidan back from episode number 1, returning.
Woo!
Aidan,
woo!
What have you got to tell us? What's been happening?
I finished my master's degree.
And are you actually smoking a pipe as well?
Oh yeah.
Retro.
Cheers.
Emmanuel, you're here with us today as well.
Yay, this is Emmanuel trying to transform my value from doing this fucking show into Patreon money. Trying to figure out how the sequence of that actually works and if Marx made a mistake or not.
Yeah, if Marx is so good at transforming, how come we can't do that, huh?
Right.
Marx may not have made a mistake, but we made a mistake in thinking that this would drive subscriptions to Patreon. Now, let's hit into chapter 8 here. Let me share my screen. I can't believe I didn't do it already. I am a loser. Let me see. Here we go. Share and present to everybody. Okay, can we all see this lovely transformation problem 1? Okay, so last week, myself and Emmanuel and Lexi did chapter 7, where we dealt with the falling rate of profit and the Akisho theorem. One part of it which dealt with a melt, Lexi said that we actually were doing the transformation problem, which is kind of strictly not true. Today we're actually going to get into it.
Yeah.
We're going to get into the transformation of prices into values and prices in a multi-sector, 3-sector economy over a couple of years, and it's going to be, I think, pretty damn groovy, and I found the table very head expanding. But Emmanuel thinks this chapter is a whole load of rubbish, so we'll get through it anyway. And first of all, we're going to hit into here the significance of the transformation problem. So the transformation problem with respect to kind of like Marx and what people say the problem with Marx is, was basically that prices and values, that there was no way of transforming between the two, and that Marx had an error. This error was first pointed out, I think, by Borkiewicz. And this chapter basically goes through and shows how that's kind of a load of rubbish, and that you can transform between prices. So when we say transform between prices and values, we're talking about situations where perhaps you have two industries and one of them might have some kind of a monopoly, and it's able to siphon value away from another industry and jack up their prices. And so Marx came up with a solution for how this happens using a labor theory of value, which was kind of a radical solution to a big problem that existed with Ricardian and Smithian classical economics beforehand. But people didn't like Marx's solution for one reason or another, and we're going to go through today and show that actually their critiques of it don't add up. Okay, so does anybody want to anybody think there's anything interesting beyond what I said in this? Anybody think something interesting in this 8.1?
Oh, well, just to defend myself, you can't do the transformation problem if you don't have a way of transforming prices and values, and that's what the melt was about. So when I was saying that we were dealing with the transformation problem last time, we're not dealing with it by name, but we're dealing with the prerequisites for dealing with it.
It did, and technically it did transform.
Go ahead and disagree with that right off the bat.
All right,
we might be getting to that, but yeah. Let's go on.
Yes, let's continue.
Travels, but if some of you might have been listening from day one. I think it's in episode 1 or episode 2 when I take issue. Me and Tom have a beef about the melt, and I was saying that you ended up with a melt as a logical consequence, and Tom was saying you need to suppose a melt, or you need some way to convert between, you need a conversion factor between values and prices. And this actually turns out to be a very important little detail. Yeah, but we'll get to that.
I don't even remember what I said. But
yeah, I doubt there's much disagreement here. We don't think that you need to assume the melt. We think
No,
that
it's just like a ratio between two figures that we have.
Yeah, exactly. It's a figure that comes out of deduction from the premises, but it is a conversion factor. Can we all agree on this?
Yes, but it's not the conversion factor between prices and values. It's the conversion factor between prices and hours of labor. And that might seem like it's the same thing as the conversion factor between prices and values, but that's not actually what it is. The melt is a translation between that makes you able to say that anything in dollars can also be expressed in hours of socially necessary labor
hours.
But you can express, like, right, you know, the value of X hours is $100, and if you're talking $100 as price or $100 as value, really actually doesn't matter. It's just if you want units of, if you want hours of labor as a unit, or if you want prices or dollars as a unit, but it doesn't convert actually between two different concepts or anything. It's just a unit conversion factor. It has no bearing on the actual categories.
Well, of course, if you're a single system person, that is absolutely how that's going to be. However, I guess the reason that I put it that way is that some people don't think it's possible to convert between the worlds of price and value at all, and that the numbers, the labor hour amounts and the dollar amounts are the different, you know, irreconcilable units there. And
That
so the fact that there is a conversion factor between these two units suggests that there's the single system relation between price and value. Between price and value.
That is indeed the dual system interpretation. That is indeed what they hold. And we're going to see why that cannot be compatible with Marx's theory in just a bit. But yes,
I think you're
absolutely right, Lexi. Thank you for that clarification.
I think we all agree with each other what the melt is. So let's not kind of confuse the issue and just keep going. I don't think we've any problems with each other's opinions. I don't have any.
All right. Initial pedantry over. Let's sink our teeth into this.
Okay. Thanks for that, guys. That's 10 minutes of extra editing. Now, this I'm just going to quote this bit here when he's talking about the transformation problem. This alleged error is also the basis upon which the Marxist and Sraffian critics claim that their simultaneous physicalist models are corrected versions of his account of the transformation problem, rather than alternative accounts. Thus, the transformation controversy has a profound ideological significance, quite apart from the substantive theoretical issues at stake. Okay, one of the things is that the falling rate of profit gets ditched if you don't do the transformation problem the way Marx said, and that has got profound political implications. Okay, where we go? Let's see where we're going to go from here. Anybody have anything they want to do on this first section? There's one little thing here. I kind of like this one here. Marx's account of the transformation of values into price of production is the firm ground on which the long-term falling rate of profit rests. But if that account is not in fact firm ground, if, as a century of criticism has supposedly proved, it is logically invalid, so is the long-term falling rate of profit. Okay.
So what do you think about that?
Yeah, I just think it's, you know, what we've seen from the simultaneous equations before the falling rate of profit falls apart. But we'll see that when we do it kind of temporarily, that everything here is going to work.
There is something about this notion that bothers me a little bit, but I think it proves how strong the argument ends up being, is that I don't think that a macro phenomenon, like something like the falling rate of profit throughout, an entire world economy, in theory, it shouldn't rely on a single set of, micro explanations. In theory, you should be able to get that big result with different accounts of how the mechanism works.
Why?
However,
why in theory?
In theory, like, how do I put this? A priori, without investigating the actual situation, I think just as a scientific principle, macro phenomena are a little more empirically undeniable, and then the micro phenomena that people posit to explain the macro phenomena, that can be, it's a little harder to adjudicate. It's a little harder to decide on what mechanism is actually operating in a macro phenomena if you have a bunch of different, or even just a few sets of micro phenomena that come to the same result. However, whenever people eliminate value theory, they can no longer reconstruct this result. There's no way to get back to this macro phenomenon if you cut out the specific account that Marx gives. Which means that if the phenomenon is there, then it suggests the micro phenomena, the micro explanation, is valid. Because we simply don't have another way to reconstruct this, apparently. And again, I'll point to the work of Robert Brenner. I respect him greatly. But the fact that he does so many little ad hoc things to try to come to this result, I think does have to do with the flaws in his analysis and the analysis of his entire generation. Like, just to defend a thesis, a macro phenomenon that he is trying to defend, If you take away Marx's value theory, you really don't have a good way of reconstructing this.
Okay, there's another big...
That was great, Lixie. And I think the one thing I would add to this is that the crux of this whole transformation thing is, just as we went through when we did table 2.2, you guys remember when we said that even though the restaurant industry produced more value as per the labor theory of value and yet received almost no profit?
Yes.
And whereas the chemical industry that had very little living labor at all got a whole bunch of profit. And this was because the capital outlay, i.e. the capital investment in dollars, was so the chemical industry was much more capital intensive, and so they received more profits than the high labor intensive, low investment industry. Do you remember that? And how that was part of like why people think Marx's labor theory of value is bullshit, because if Marx's labor theory of value holds, then of course the restaurant industry should receive the most profits. And so in preparation for this, I read chapter 8, and I also read the chapter in volume 3 to which most of this pertains. And I think Marx had such a great quote here that I think sort of rhymes with what you just said, Lixie. And Marx is saying this. He's saying, how could living labor be the sole source of profit in view of the fact that a reduction in the quantity of labor required for production appears not to exert any influence on profit? So in this case, like the chemical industry, right? We have a reduction in the quantity of labor required, and it actually boosted our profits, right? Moreover, it seems in certain circumstances to be the nearest source of an increase in profit. Yeah, that's pretty much what we already said, at least for the individual capitalist. And there's a whole bunch of there in the middle, but he ends with let me see if I can get the what the capitalist and consequently also the political economists see is that part of the paid labor per piece of commodity changes with the productivity of labor, and that the value of each piece also changes accordingly. What they do not see is that the same applies to unpaid labor contained in the very piece of the commodity. And this is perceived so much less, since the average profit is only accidentally determined by the unpaid labor absorbed in the sphere of the individual capitalist. So the individual capitalist in the restaurant industry is going to see that, you know, they're not getting that much profit, and yet they're performing labor, whereas the one who invests in the chemical industry where there is no labor is going to get a whole lot of profit and a great return on that investment. And so they're not going to see, there's no evidence for any labor theory of value being present at all here. And he goes on to say, it is only in such a crude and meaningless form that we can glimpse that the value of commodities is determined by the labor contained in them. So Marx is actually saying that, you know, in the real world, the rate of profit and how much you get back on your investment is, it's the money talking, baby. And the actual living labor performed is not actually what's determining the actual real profits of real companies or real industries. But the way that we can glimpse in such a sad way, or a meaningless form, the only glimpse that we have is that increasing productivity tends to lead to lower prices. That's our one little empirical fact that can lead us in the right direction. And so this, and that's why, and if you bring back on screen, Tom, the page that you had up in chapter 8, he is Kleiman is actually also talking about this, but I am not sure why he doesn't quote this, because I think it's such a great Marx quote. Because he says, it's where he talks about that the reason why Marx talks about value and labor time is because he wants to make a point about productivity and long-term trends in prices. It's right in the beginning of the chapter, I just saw
Which
that.
chapter?
Chapter 8.
Chapter 8, yeah, but whereabouts in chapter?
Right in the beginning of, let's see if I can see here where it is. It's when he's talking about the firm ground.
What page?
140,
I think. Let's see. Yes.
Yeah, confirm 140.
And he says, as I have noted, when Marx argued that productivity increases cause commodities values to fall, this was his way of singling out changes in productivity as a key determinant of changes in real world prices. This is that thing right there is sort of the golden nugget that both Kleiman and Marx really push on.
Keep reading.
Yeah, but yeah, it's so I'm sorry, that was a bit too much of a monologue. I'll shut up now.
No, just don't shut up, keep reading.
Okay.
Right.
Like here, what is it?
Why don't
One
you
can
read that
of
paragraph
course
there.
Yeah. One can of course dispense with the word value and still theorize the inverse relationship between prices and productivity. Yet if one abandons Marx's concept of value in favor of physicalism, then, as we showed, one must also abandon the notion that productivity increases tend to rise with the rate of inflation. So like, yeah, you can still do, so this is, I think, perceptive. You could do economic science just based on productivity and not really think about what's like a micro phenomenon of what's going on inside productivity, but you're going to miss some,
key determinant of price.
Yeah, you're going to miss the ability to explain a bunch of things in economics you otherwise wouldn't be able to. It would be a necessarily incomplete science. And that's what I've been getting at with bourgeois economics. Can be scientific, but it's always going to be incomplete. It's always going to have this blind spot.
Yeah, it's just not going to be as good a theory, essentially. That's what we're getting at.
Well, bourgeois economics, from abandoning value onward, I should say.
Yeah. Let's read it, because I like this part on the metaphysical critique. Another part of the answer is that value is not metaphysical in the sense that the critics mean. The distinction between value and price exists in real life. Whenever we ask whether we've gotten our money's worth or got a good value, we are asking whether the value of the thing we bought was not, in fact, less than the price we paid. But am I not resorting to clever wordplay? Doesn't the term value here mean refer to utility, use value, rather than what Marx meant by value, something akin to but distinct from and regulative of price? To see that this is not the case, consider Marx's observation that the most ordinary merchant does not believe that he is getting the same value for his £1 when he receives 1 quarter of wheat for it in a period of famine and in a period of glut. This is a pretty basic point. Even this ordinary merchant realizes that he has received more value in exchange for his £1 in a period of famine and less value in a period of glut, even though he has received the same amount of wheat and the utility of the wheat is the same in both cases. Since the value of the wheat varies, though its price and utility do not, it is clear that value is distinct from both price and utility.
That's a fucking bomb right there.
Yeah, I think, and if you leave out value as a scientific concept, you're going to end up with just a kind of a shittier theory.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's get into this.
Wait. Whoa.
Okay.
Because there's a serious bong rip right after this.
Okay,
right.
Let's go bong ripping again.
After utility. So this kind of blew me away a little bit, and maybe I could talk about this. The paragraph right afterwards. One might perhaps argue that we only think of them, value, price, utility, as distinct, that the unobserved, quote, value exists only in our minds. Actually, Marx himself affirmed that value is a mental construct. But our mental constructs are part of the real world. We may base many of our actions on the value construct. For instance, when we buy items, if and only if they are as, quote, worth as much or more than they cost. Moreover, the mere fact that value is unobserved does not imply that value relations lack a constitutive or regulatory role. The nature, causes, and effects of this mental construct are thus worthy of theorization and explanation. So what do we think he means by mental construct here? Because it seems to me calling value a mental construct is only true on an abstraction level, but that excuse me, on a conceptual abstraction level, because it seems to me that the pressure that value exerts in the world is more than a mental construct. Like, of course, our concept of gravity is mental, but the thing that pulls you down when you jump out of an airplane is not mental, right?
Correct. Yeah, that's what I gathered that he was saying, because so what I looked up. Tom, can you bring up the footnote, because Marx himself affirmed that value is a mental construct. Footnote 1. I found that actually to be pretty important. I don't remember if it's a reference or if he actually brings up the actual quote, but yeah, there we go. The basis of value is the fact that human beings relate to each other's labor as equal. This is an abstraction, just as you said, Lixie. Like all human thought and social relations only exist among human beings to the extent that they think. and possess this power of abstraction from sensuous individuality and contingency. The kind of political economist who attacks the determination of value by labor time on the ground that the work performed by two individuals doing the same time is not absolutely equal, although in the same trade, doesn't even know that what distinguishes human social relations from relations between animals. He is a beast. As beasts, the same fellows then also have no difficulty in overlooking the fact that no two use values are absolutely identical, and even less difficulty in judging use values which have no common measure whatever as exchange values according to the degree of utility. So this is kind of confusing.
I really like this.
The whole thing is Marx. He has a similar thing. So just to give you a background why my brain might be a bit fried and why I might be a bit hyper tonight. So I read fucking all of the economic philosophical manuscripts and chapter 9 of volume 3 and this fucking chapter today. So it's hard for me to keep apart where I read what.
Damn.
But Marx does talk a lot about abstraction and equality and the difference between use value and value in the economic manuscripts of 1844, which I think this is what it refers to, is that, and he also talks a lot about the differences between human beings and animals, and what makes a man, that kind of thing. And yeah, so basically the mere fact that so value is a mental construct. It's not it's not an imagined thing. It's a real thing. If I'm shitty at making shoes, I still have to compete with someone who's good at making shoes, and the value is still going to be same in the market. But it is an abstraction, and it is something that we keep in our minds, and it is an alienation from ourselves, right? It's something that we observe. It's objectively there, but we still have it in our minds, comparing the products and fruits of our labor between us. I'm going to get pissed that you can edit an episode about value theory in like an hour, and it takes me 5 hours. Like, that gets makes me pissed off, but that's the way it is. It's a
me a lot longer than an hour.
It's still real.
Well, the thing I really liked about this relation was that he's saying, for those people who are saying that you cannot equate human labor, they do equate the products of human labor. Two tins of paint that look identical, they do equate in the market. You know what I mean? So he's saying, like, if we can equate the products, why can't we actually equate the labor? It's a similar argument.
And labor is the only thing that we can equate, because we cannot equate use values. No two use values are absolutely identical.
Exactly.
So if marginal utility was right, this beer is worth more to me than it is to you, and sort of that's why we're exchanging products, and that's where profit comes from. That just cannot be the case, because you just can't compare use values. It's unitless.
Okay.
I think what Andrew's saying here is
Hi,
pretty
Pouya.
much. Hey, Tom, how's it going? Sorry, I'm late.
Right,
Thanks for coming.
Okay.
Thanks for coming.
Yeah, I took a nap and slept for too long. But anyways,
You got enough energy for value theory now.
Yeah. I think what Andrew's saying is that all you see empirically is just price. You don't see value. And Marx is just using the concept of value to explain price. I think that's all that Andrew was saying there.
I agree with that.
Yeah. Okay, let's move along here to Marx's resolution of the classicist problem. Okay. So we've talked about what that problem is already. And here he's saying that the classical school did not resolve this conundrum. And Marx solved it in a simple, straightforward manner. Okay, let's just read this bit here. Okay. Okay. The essence of his solution is that the total amount of profit in the economy is the same when prices adjust to equalize rates of profit as when they reflect commodities' actual values, i.e. the amounts of labor to produce them. So in volume 1, they would be selling at their actual values. And he's saying that in the real world, actually, we equate the profit rates between, or there's a tendency to equate these profit rates between the chemical industry and the restaurant industry. Okay, but when we actually do that transformation, the rate of profit in the economy stays the same. The total profit is simply distributed differently. Accordingly, the total amount of sales revenue received throughout the economy, total price, is also unchanged, merely distributed differently in the two cases. Thus, although the law of value would seem to be falsified if we were to confine our attention to individual industries, it holds true as a law pertaining to the aggregate economy. Okay, will we look at a table here? Because I think we'll just look at this simple table, unless anybody has an objection.
We squeeze in a Marx quote before that.
Okay, go on here. Where?
All right. If you hit Control Tab to Capital Volume 3.
Oh yeah, here you go. Capital Volume 3. Right.
See, value form people, just because we want to do math doesn't mean we don't appreciate the philosophical side of Marx. Look at us appreciating.
If you hit the Control F and you search for the word long.
Long. 1 of 5.
And it's 3 out of 5.
Okay.
This is a
Long
great
periods, this one.
Says pretty much what Kleiman says, but that's also sort of my point.
This one here.
Yeah, that one.
Okay, it's
so
a bit small, but
in spite of great changes occurring continually, as we shall see, in the actual rates of profit within the individual spheres of production, so i.e. individual firms, etc., any real change in the general rate of profit, and you guys remember what that is, right? Unless brought about by way of an exception by extort, blah, blah, blah. So, unless something really weird occurs.
Qualifications.
Is the belated effect. So there's a time thing going on here. Is a belated effect. Let's see here. So that I look at my own screen. Is the belated effect of a series of fluctuations extending over very long periods. Fluctuations which require much time before consolidating and equalizing one another to bring about a change in the general rate of profit. Right? This is one of the reasons why I think people get confused with and claiming Marx is an equilibrium theorist, which he's clearly not, considering the rest of this chapter. But anyway,
not in the way that they understand equilibrium.
No, not at all. So
I'm open to there being like other ways of using equilibrium type math in like another way in Marx's theory, because there is a concept of equilibrium that he's going for, but it's certainly not this one.
Yeah, exactly. So there are all sorts of firms competing with each other, and as soon as a new computer comes out, it's going to take some time before everyone adopts it, and even then, everyone is not adopting it at the same time. Everyone is not, when something new in productivity happens, that's not happening across all firms in one industry at exactly the same time, is pretty much what he's saying. So they're going to equalize one another to bring about a change in the rate of profit, and that takes a long ass time. But in all shorter periods, quite aside from fluctuation of market prices, that's actually an important parenthesis, but whatever. A change in the prices of production is therefore always traceable prima facie to actual changes in the value of commodities. right? A change in the prices of production is therefore always traceable to actual changes in the value of commodities, i.e. to changes in the total amount of labor time required for their production. Mere changes in the money expression of the same values are naturally not at all considered here, which means he's not talking about an inflation, basically.
Okay.
So,
yeah.
Yeah. Just to make the point that Kleiman is not saying anything here that isn't already stated expressly in Marx, which I think is a good point to make, because we've taken Kleiman's word for granted that he actually is the correct reader of Marx, but like here Marx says explicitly that the prices, a change in prices, are always traceable to actual changes in the value. That's what he's saying. I think that was an important thing, and the tables are just there to show you how that happens.
Okay. I really like this quote here. I think this is an important quote. The temporalist character of Marx's reasoning is striking. If profit is produced before outputs go to market, then competition, whether between lending institutions and other kinds of capitalist firms or between capitalists in different industries, cannot alter the total amount of profit that already exists. What's done is done. And that's quite important for the idea of what is the procedure. There is production, there is surplus created in production, and after the surplus is created, there's divvying up amongst these different capitalists as to who gets what. Okay, and that's the order of the thing. It's not like things get sold and then you figure out what the profit is. It's the surplus exists first. Okay, I said that with quite a bit of spittle in my mouth. Let's go forward. That will be edited.
Catching us live.
Yeah, catching us live, motherfuckers. Okay.
Yeah, table.
Yeah. Okay. So here we have two branches of production which have different rates. What do they have?
Organic compositions.
Different organic
value
rates
of
value rates of profit. An exact copy of table 2.2, by the way.
So they have the same, they have the exact same level of exploitation, rate of exploitation, but because there are different lumps of capital associated with them, if we look at branch 1 has nearly 4 times the just over 3 times the amount of constant capital ratio to variable capital. So we see that when branch 1 has a 20% rate of profit, but when we equalize for our rate of for our price of production, we get 25%, and branch 2 is 40%, and that reduces down to 25%. But the rate of total value rate of profit is 25, and the total price of production rate of profit is 25% too.
Yeah, and before we started, you had a question about the sequence here.
Yes.
And also, total price of production is equal to total value output, which is also important. That's one of Marx's equalities that are maintained.
Yeah. And in this scenario, we have, I think, price and value is equal to 1. There's a 1-to-1 ratio. So they will be actually the same number as well. There's no melt involved. Okay. You were going to talk here, Emmanuel, and explain just again, we'll go through the logical progression of what happens. So over to you, Emmanuel.
Right. So this is exactly the same progression as we had in table 2.2. For all intents and purposes, this is exactly the same table. I have no idea why he brings it up again, or why he doesn't just remind us of the table back in 2.2, but whatever. The key things here is that we have some known quantities and we have some unknown quantities. And the key here is to figure out which is which, because that is key to Marx's entire theory. So in the last episode, we said that one of the problems with simultaneous evaluation is that the capital invested is not given, but is calculated. And turns out a lot of the beefs about Marx's theory and why some work and why some don't work is what is taken as a given and what needs to be derived. But it's clear from, and I'm not even going to say I think it's clear, because it is clear from chapter 3 that Marx, as well as Kleiman, take the capital advanced as a given. So we know how much cash we invested, and that's super important. So we know that we spent 54 units of cash on
So let's so let's look. The total is spent on our constant capital for the economy is 70, and our total spend on wages is 10
for the economy. So but just for the time being, let's go row by row. So the total capital invested in branch 1 is 60, right? So we spend 54 on machinery and whatnot. Maybe this is our chemical industry, right? So 54, so super expensive machines, and we spend 6 on wages. So our total capital for that particular industry, the total investment is $60 million, right? That produces a surplus value from living labor of 12. And a total value of 72, right? Because we're assuming here that all the machinery that we buy, they're gonna transfer all of their value in 1 year. So there is, every year we have to replace their machines. They're gonna burn out in a year. So all of their value will be transferred in the production.
I think Kleiman said in this example, there's no fixed assets. So just for like...
Yes, but that's his point. There are no fixed assets, but there is constant capital. And that's one of the differences between fixed assets and constant capital. So, but there is constant capital. There are machines. They're just not. They're just
used up in production.
Yeah. So all of they're depreciating the entire value of their. They're transferring all of their value in the production period. So 54. So we invest $60 in this industry. Living labor performs 12 hours of surplus labor, which means that the total value of the whole shimamabang is 72. So 60 plus 12. All right, cool. Nothing weird there. Let's go to the second industry, which is a lot more labor intensive, but less capital intensive. So maybe this is our restaurant industry. So $16 million of worth of equipment, a little less wages, but in relation to the machinery, it's much higher, right? As a percentage. So the total capital outlay, all the stuff that we pay for is 20. And they're going to produce a surplus value of $8 million, which means that 20 plus 8, the total value of everything is 28. All right, cool. Now we add all of those up, and we get some neat totals. All of the invested capital in all of the industries, so wages plus machinery, equals 80. So 70 plus 10, right? The surplus labor performed equals the total surplus labor performed across all industries is 20, which means that the whole shenanigan bang is 100. So there's $100 million of value here. in this economy being produced and being crystallized in these commodities. So the total value of the whole economy is 100. That means that we now know that the prices are also 100. So total prices therefore have to be 100. We also know how much wages we've paid in each industry. So C is known. We also know how much we paid in wages, V, that's also known. So, and S is also known, since we know that it has to add up to 100. Are you with me so far?
Mm-hmm.
Right, have I lost you? All right, okay. So that means that we can calculate our rate of surplus value, or our rate of profit in value terms. So our surplus labor in our value rate of profit in the low work intensive, high capital intensive industry, industry 1, let's call that the chemical industry, is 20%, because we gained 20 units of surplus value out of an investment with 60. So it's 12 divided by 60, which is 20%. And in our high labor intensive, maybe bakery, we had an investment of just 20. So we didn't have to invest that much cash, but we gained $8 million in surplus value, or worth. We didn't actually gain $8 million. We'll get to that. But we produced $8 million worth of extra value to this whole economy. So 8 divided by 20, that's 40%. All right. So the economy-wide rate of profit is therefore 25%. So now we know that the price rate of profit also has to be 25%, because they have to be equal, because total prices have to be equal to total value. Otherwise, nothing makes sense. And so once we know that the price rate of profit is 25%, and that these 25% tend to equalize over long periods of time, in sort of the ideal world that we're examining here, each of them should receive in their actual prices, in their actual dollars, when they actually sell their stuff and look into their bank account, they're going to receive 25% of the total dollars in circulation. So that means, or 25% of the 25% is going to be the prices they receive per product, as a function of how much they invested. So whereas so the amount we invested is the same. We've still in the case of the capital intensive business, we still we know how much we invested, and that's key. We know that we spent $60 million. That's known. And we know also now that the general rate of profit is 25%. That means that the prices, pi in this case, is going to be 15. And for the restaurant industry, it's going to be 5. So the sequence here is entirely dependent on the capital outlay, the things we've actually paid are known quantities.
Okay.
Are known quantities in price terms, and that is the transformation of values into prices. That's how it works.
Okay. Can I read this little bit here that kind of sums up what you just said there? It's important. This is what Andrew said. It is important to stress that, in keeping with Marx's solution, the sums of constant and variable capital and the surplus values are data. So this is what you're saying. We know these already. These aren't things we have to calculate, specified at the start. The only derived magnitudes are the prices, the profits, and the price rates of profits. As we said, see below, this is a key difference between Marx's solution and his critics' corrections of it. Okay, from like a kind of a statistical or a mathematical point of view, what you would say in this is that, like, I think it's true to say there are like a lot more degrees of freedom
In
in these
the
equations. Marx's.
in the simultaneous equations.
No, in Marx's one. That there
What do you
What
say
do you mean
there?
by that?
Well, is it not that you've got less constraints?
I think you have less constraints in the simultaneous one because I think what Andrew's saying is that they, what is it, retroactively change the constant,
Constant capital is changed
the
afterwards.
the constant cap. I think that's what Andrew's saying. So I think he's saying that there are more degrees of freedom in in their example.
Oh, let me see.
So there's another quote by Marx here that summarizes Kleiman's point, but I think in a very articulate manner, and that also explains what's going on in this table. Can I read that, or would it be?
Sorry, yeah, whereabouts? Sorry.
So it's in again in chapter 9, and if you control F and on therefore, this whole paragraph is actually
There's
really
a lot of them. There's 20 therefores. Which one is it?
therefore, comma the
Portion of the prices.
yes, therefore the portion of the price, right? All right, okay, that's the one. So therefore, and the therefore is pretty much what Kleiman said, but the portion of the price of commodities which replaces the element of capital consumed in the production of these commodities, so the cost price, the portion therefore which will have to be used to buy back these consumed capital values, i.e. their cost price. So, you know, we paid for the machines and for the wages with cash, we have to buy those back, depends entirely on the outlay of capital within the respective spheres of production, so within the different industries. But the other element of the price of commodities, the profit added to this cost price, does not depend on the amount of profit produced in a given sphere of production by a given capital in a given period of time. It depends on the mass of profit which falls as an average for any given period to each individual capital as an adequate part of the total social capital invested in social production. There you go. So the amount of capital outlay, the cost price, i.e. the cost for the wages and the machines, is given. That's key. It's not the profits received. It does not depend on the profit or the surplus labor actually performed in this given industry in this given period of time. It depends rather on the mass of profit which falls as an average, hence the pi over S plus V in Kleiman's table, for any given period. Again, this harkens back to the whole temporal. Like Marx is super clear that his theory is temporal. For any given period to each individual capital as an adequate part of the total social capital invested.
Okay.
Production.
Okay. Pouya, why I said that was less degrees of freedom is because when we get on to chapter 9, they make sure that these total equalities hold by assuming them, and then they calculate backwards to get the prices of I think capital and the value of price per unit.
Yeah.
That they're arbitrary decisions of
Who does this?
constraints. All the solutions in chapter 9 that try to get around the problems. So the Borkovich, Moskowska, Winternitz price system.
Oh, okay, yeah, that's what I. Okay.
So they have extra pieces of information that's restricting the solution there with respect to Marx's one. So they're restricted arbitrarily, while these ones,
Okay.
the
I'm
actual totals come from just the simple magnitudes you start with. You know what I mean? So that
Okay.
there's less restrictions.
I haven't. Yeah. I haven't read chapter 9 yet. I've only read chapter 8, so
Okay.
I'll look at it when I get to it and
Right.
can think about it.
Yeah, like the thinking for me that makes this very elegant is that you assume a few small little things, and as you do your little calculations depending on them, these three totals or aggregates fall out of the equation, fall out of it. Now, with some of the other solutions by simultaneists, they assume the aggregates and work back and try and calculate what that means for different values of prices or for price per unit, I think, and capital value. So that they're arbitrarily assuming some of these totals, where from Marx's point of view, those totals aggregates fall out of the stuff. Let's just read this a little bit here.
And they're given.
They fall out. They're the consequences of simple given totals. That's one way we could put it. Are you sharing a pipe with Aidan?
No, I have my own pipe.
My God, this is the most hipster
I have
thing I've ever done.
8 of my own.
A Marx's value theory series, and everybody smoking pipes. My God, I'm never going to live this down.
I mean, you know, it's the classical way to enjoy Marxist value theory. It's over a pint or a pipe, obviously.
And we're doing both, so.
Well, here I am eating an orange and drinking a glass of water.
Lame.
So lame.
I'm also
an
drinking
Irishman.
water if it makes you feel better.
So
It doesn't.
So
Makes
Not
you feel
improving
worse.
anything.
before you read it, can I just it's a super short sentence, and then I promise I'll shut up. But it's also just
Where is it?
About why it's correct to assume the capital outlay and not derive it. And
Whereabouts is this
why
sentence?
they're always given, or that Marx actually thinks they're given. So,
Yeah, where is it?
yeah, okay. So it's if you control F the and then cost dash price. He says the cost price of a commodity is always smaller than its value, for no matter how much the cost price of a commodity.
Sorry, there's 36. There's 36 of them.
Okay, shit. All right. Fuck. Let's see. Can you if you
The
control
cost price. Hold on. Keep going. The cost price of.
Can you
Google a
control
larger part of the sentence.
Okay, I have it. Yeah, here we go.
Right. Okay. So blah 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 blah. This is also where Marx clearly states that the TSSI is correct. Blah blah blah. No matter how much the cost price of a commodity may differ from the value of the means of production consumed by it. Right. This past mistake is immaterial to the capitalists, because the capitalists actually paid whatever for the plumbus or the schlieb or whatnot. The actual value does not concern the capitalist. The cost price of a particular commodity is a definite condition which is given and independent of the production of our capitalist, while the result of his production is a commodity containing surplus value. So, you know, the cost prices are a given. The capitalist knows how much he spent on machinery and wages. And he knows, you know, that the servers he bought were really, you know, he really did spend $100 on them. There's no revaluation going on. There's no replacement cost things going on. He knows, you know, and he doesn't give two shits about the actual value of the means of production that he bought. The main thing is, you know, and he doesn't give a shit about the labor theory of value even. So the cost price is a definite condition which is given. There you go. You know, and
Okay.
kind of fun question as far as I'm concerned. Right. Okay. All right. I'm going to shut up now.
Okay. Okay. We have it in writing. Emmanuel's going to shut up. Right. Now, Lexi, you read this bit.
Yes. Oh, good. These are important. Marx's three aggregate value price equalities follow immediately from his conception that competition leads to a different distribution of the surplus value without altering the total amount already produced. 1. Total profit equals total surplus value. 2. Total price equals total value. 3. The aggregate, quote, price rate of profit equals the aggregate, quote, value rate of profit. In Marx's view, these aggregate equalities were immensely significant. They confirm both the law of value and his theory that all profit has its origin in the exploitation of workers. So, to quote Marx, the law of value is not affected by the fact that the equalization of profit gives rise to governing average prices for commodities that diverge from their individual values. This affects only the addition of surplus value to the various commodity prices. It does not abolish surplus value itself, nor the total value of commodities as the source of these various price components.
Wow, that was wonderful.
Yeah.
I think
Okay.
I think
Marx-
Andrew does a really good job of just summarizing volume 3, I think it's chapter 9, where Marx does this. I think he does a great job of going over that.
I enjoyed popping back and forth between that chapter in Capital 3 and this chapter, because if nothing else, if Andrew is wrong about this, Marx was also wrong about it. That's so one of the things that I was interested in is maybe there's a part of this book where Andrew takes a little more care to derive these three aggregate equalities, right? Am I right? Or do you feel like he adequately already sort of reconstructed that argument here?
I think it's okay. I think I feel good.
All right, cool.
I feel good.
So-
Okay. Now here we had this Böhm-Bawerk critique, which we have actually talked about before. I don't know if we want to go into it here. Does anybody feel like they have a longing to go into it?
Oh,
At this rate, we've done
Böhm-Bawerk?
about 3 pages in about an hour. My God.
Right.
Does anybody want to talk about this?
No, not if I know Emmanuel's kind of an expert on it, but because he read the book. But I mean, if I have no desire to go into it, especially
I know
if you
Lexi
don't.
does. Lexi, if you have it, do it. Come on, let's go.
Okay, I'm interested in this insofar as Böhm-Bawerk has a critique with Postone, Moish Postone, the recently deceased RIP, sort of Neue Marx-Lektor, theorist, or I don't know. This is interesting because, first of all, Samuelson, the post-Keynesian guy, apparently dismisses Böhm-Bawerk, and then the specialist literature, more or less ignores Böhm-Bawerk from there, which I think that's an interesting claim. I think that's an interesting phenomenon, because looking at this over and over again, it's not really Borkovich, but Böhm-Bawerk that made a critique that I thought was genuinely challenging, as opposed to Borkovich knows that he's just changing Marx. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so what I really like about this is that Postone's response is clearly inadequate. And you need to engage with something that Postone insists that Marx isn't really interested in. The best reason that I think the best one, really a peripheral reason, but one of the better reasons to me that this matters, no matter who's interested in what, is that Postone kind of gets von Bauwerk's like claim wrong. Let's see. Let me see exactly where it is.
Oh yeah, that was funny.
It is
It's
funny.
funny how yeah, it's funny how von Bauwerk is still kind of popular in Austrian circles. I still hear him referenced pretty regularly. Just
Because they only
Yeah.
they only have about three
But-
theorists. That's why. There's von Bauwerk, there is Mises, and there's Hayek,
and hi-
and then that's it.
yeah,
But,
Yeah,
yeah, I
what's-
think
is that true?
not even an
They have like
exaggeration.
Rothbard, I think.
Oh, Rothbard.
Yeah,
Yeah,
but they
come
have
on
a few
now.
more.
Rothbard.
Yeah, that diddler.
Yeah. Okay, come on now.
And,
Come on,
uh,
Alexi.
Okay,
Where are we
so,
going?
so all right. So,
Bauwerk was the only
um,
had a value theory.
so
There's a thing here actually. Before I go, like, if we're going to talk about what von Bauwerk is saying, I think he was saying that at one place Marx was saying commodities sell at their value, and then in chapter 9 of volume 3, he said they don't sell at their value, and he thought that this was a contradiction.
right. And
That's what
von
Andrew was
Bauwerk-
claiming here.
Yeah,
that's
one part of it. It's the main part of it, but there's another thing too.
About the total value equals total price is a tautology.
Yeah, that
Yeah.
that one. Yeah, which is
Okay.
weird if you don't understand von Bauwerk's own sort of value theory, but we can get into that. It's fucking no.
Oh, come on.
Okay.
That's interesting. That's
right,
interesting.
Let's do
because-
let's
because
do your
a lot
thing about Postone that you wanted
Yeah.
to do. Lexi,
Yeah,
finish
just-
that
just,
one. before. Whereabouts is it?
Okay, so it's actually going to be in 8.4 on page 147. It's the third paragraph from the bottom.
Okay.
Let's see.
Can you kind of put together what in English what Postone was saying
Well,
in response
first,
to it?
First of all, the important thing is that Postone is doing this thing that I think is kind of fun, where he's saying, well, clearly Marx isn't interested in something that his theory ends up doing, and that he's not interested in establishing a critical political economy. He's simply making this critique. But I think inevitably, when you're looking at Marx as a body of thought, you do have something kind of that calls for systematization that he leaves behind. And what, like, so von Bauwerk thinks that Marx affirmed and denies the proposition that prices diverge from values. In other words, that Marx had asserted that the proposition and its negation were only apparently contradictory, and that he had promised to substantiate that assertion, but he failed to do so. So I think that's a misreading of Marx, but what Postone thinks that von Bauwerk is doing is, let's see. Where is it exactly? Oh, yeah, and this is on the top of, come on. It's really funny. Hold on. It's really funny when I actually get to it. So first of all, Postone doesn't think he's refuting von Bauwerk, but more importantly, he thinks von Bauwerk is he just doesn't understand that von Bauwerk thinks that Marx does both of these things. He doesn't actually understand von Bauwerk's argument. I can't actually find it. I took notes on it, but I'm not really sure where it is. I think if we went through this like in a little more detail, we could get down to it. Because there's a few things about Postone's critique that I think is interesting, mostly in light of the experience that I've been having trying to get people to engage with Marx's value theory, and just the conversations I've been having around the effort that we're putting forward in this podcast, you know, with a lot of Marxists that are dedicated in Marxist politics, Marxists that are dedicated in historical materialism, or, you know, in history, or even people that, you know, spend a significant time in, you know, like kind of hawking a Marxist worldview as a solution to a lot of problems. I had a listener kind of say that, it's sort of enough for me to, this was a commenter on the webpage, sort of enough for me to understand, the worldview and to have read this. It's enough. I don't have to get to the nitty gritty of this. But I think Kleiman ultimately has the right idea that without grasping the critiques being made here, and just trying to look away from these problems and saying Marx wasn't trying to do that. He didn't care about that. He wasn't trying to do anything positive. It just basically refuses to deal with that. If you're going to make a critique of something, your objections have to hold up together. Like, and Marx, Postone kind of thinks Bombawark is, I think, just objecting to something that Marx affirmed.
Okay.
Instead of affirming and denying.
Okay, let's read these two paragraphs. Okay. Do you want to take these two paragraphs? I think these two paragraphs just kind of discuss what you're saying.
Here it is. Yeah. I've been looking for these things. Even when Postone's discussion is read exclusively as a response to Bombawark, it fails to address his actual charge of contradiction. Postone emphasizes the importance of the distinction between essence and appearance to Marx's understanding of the price-price relationship. Marx wished to show that price is the form of appearance of an essence, namely value. Since appearances, quote, both express and veil the essence, express it in a distorted form, the, quote, divergence of prices from values should be understood as integral to, rather than a logical contradiction within, Marx's analysis. This is all true, I believe, but it completely misconstrues Bombawark's critique. He did not claim that Marx's analysis was logically contradictory because prices diverge from values. Rather, as we saw above, Bombawark claimed that it was logically contradictory because, in Volume 1, had both affirmed and denied the proposition that prices diverge from values. In other words, Marx had asserted that the proposition and its negation were only apparently contradictory, and he had promised to substantiate that assertion, but he failed to do so. So Postone is trying to kind of groove his way out of this problem and doesn't actually understand the objection. And Postone, I think, is doing something that Marxists want to do anyway, is not have to grapple with that part, and because it's scary. Marx might have done something wrong there, and if he got some math wrong or something, maybe our whole worldview doesn't make sense. So what if we just groove past that and let's not deal with that?
I think what Postone says there is precisely correct about the essence and value. But I think that what Andrew was saying is that that's not exactly what Bombawark was actually saying. He was saying that Marx claimed to be able to, Bombawark interpreted Marx as as having contradicted himself between Volume 1 and Volume 3. Well, I think that's a gross misreading. That's a very uncharitable reading of what Marx actually said.
Of course. And Postone has a far superior reading.
And Postone has a far superior understanding of what Marx was doing, and he expresses it very well, but he doesn't precisely attack Bombawark's kind of shoddy reading. That's Andrew's point, as far as I can make out.
Yeah, I mean, there's a reframing of the point on the top of 148.
Okay, yeah.
Putting the matter in philosophical terms, what is at issue is whether value is actually an essence that underlies price. Bombawark, in effect, claimed that it is not. Postone's critique fails to refute this claim, since all he really tells us is that price differs from value. He says that this difference is a difference between appearance and essence, but that doesn't make it so. After all, price also differs from orange juice, but that does not make orange juice an essence that underlies price. To show that value is indeed the essence of price, Postone would have needed to show that Marx's understanding of the significance of the aggregate equalities was right, and that Pace Borkovitz and his successors, the aggregate value price equalities do hold true, but he simply ignores the issue. The crux of the problem, once again, is that Postone is discussing Marx's intentions and method when the point at issue is instead the logical consistency of his arguments.
Okay, that's pretty clear. Like, that's really good.
I think he has a
Yeah.
Kleiman has a passage here where he says something to the effect that a Stone's critique is basically that Böhm-Bawerk doesn't understand what Marx is getting at. He has something, a sentence to that effect somewhere. But the problem isn't that Böhm-Bawerk didn't understand what Marx was getting at, although he didn't.
That is true.
Böhm-Bawerk has specific objections that need to be addressed specifically, and that can't just be, as you said, Lexi, circumvented by saying, well, that's not really what Marx is getting at. Maybe he got the details wrong, but that's not his point. That's not what Marx is getting at. And Kleiman is saying, well, it's not enough to show that it's not what he's getting at. It's showing the steps, showing the steps of how he gets at what he's getting at is is crucial to being able to actually argue for why Marx's conclusions are correct and his sort of the spirit of his argument, as it were. That's sort of my what I think Kleiman was getting at with his just claiming that Marx is getting at something, which isn't Böhm-Bawerk's point. And there are a lot of more things to say about Böhm-Bawerk's critique. I actually think Kleiman is doing both a charitable and uncharitable reading of Böhm-Bawerk at the same time, but that's maybe we could, if people are really interested in the Böhm-Bawerk stuff, maybe we could do a separate episode on it.
Definitely. I would love to do that.
If people would love to get into more detail, but I'll just say this one thing to try to reconstrue Böhm-Bawerk's critique in something that is a little more charitable than what Kleiman is presenting here, but it's still the Kleiman's argument still holds, is that Böhm-Bawerk is concerned about the determination of prices, right? He's an empiricist. Empirically, there are differences in prices between different commodities, and he wants to know why commodity A has a higher price than commodity B. And Marx in volume 1 does all of these good things, and he actually kind of likes it in volume 1, where Marx talks about ratios between different commodities. He thinks that is kind of good, but it doesn't explain prices yet. And he's saying that, in volume 1, Marx is saying that we have all of these different ratios between commodities. Here's how to explain that, but that doesn't really. And if prices were equal to values, then Böhm-Bawerk would have been satisfied. But Marx says, here's why product A has a higher value than commodity B. But he also says that values don't necessarily translate into prices. And that's what Böhm-Bawerk wants to get at. And he's like, well, when the hell are you going to get to, the actual empirical evidence that we see in the market? And he goes to Capital Volume 3, and he's promised, Marx has promised to show why product A also has a higher price than product B. And all Marx says in Volume 3 is, well, you got to look at product A and product B in aggregate, and then do all of this math with general rates of profit, etc., and do all this complicated stuff, and then you can arrive at different prices. And Böhm-Bawerk kind of, he's unsatisfied by that, because again, he's he's an empiricist. He doesn't really buy this whole deductive argument thing. He wants to Marx to get at his shtick. He wants Marx to get to the point, and wants Marx to say that here is my account of why A in the real world is more expensive in price terms than B. And all he does when he finally gets to discussing prices is saying, well, if you add up all of the different prices and stuff, and Bambarek he just says, I'm not gonna, I will have none of that. Basically, that's sort of the more charitable-ish reading of Bambarek, is that he likes when Marx talks about values, because then he actually talks about differences in ratios and things, and that's all that Bambarek is interested in. But when he finally gets to price and the empirical stuff, he does all of this aggregate shit. And Bambarek says, you know, that's not what I'm interested in. What I wanted to show me is the price of A and the price of B, and that's what a scientific theory should be able to show in simplicity.
Basically, just enough.
Yeah, he wants like the micro prices. He wants like predictive theory of micro price. He wants determinative theory of micro price, which that's not.
I think you can get a micro price theory out of Marx. I think the prices of production do explain them, because then you just take the total price of the capital outlay for an individual industry and divide that by the units that are produced by that capital outlay, and then you get the unit price.
Yeah, but exactly, and that's what.
But you're assuming.
But Bambarek is going to say that I just don't buy it. You promised to show us a determinant for an individual firm. You said that labor, the reason why A is more expensive than B is because A had more labor in it, and now you're saying that you have to add up all of these aggregates and then calculate backwards in order to derive the price. But that's not what I wanted you to show me. And well, you know,
anyway, let's keep going. Let's keep going. We know
that you're exactly right. I mean, Marx does, I think, at least to my satisfaction, show how that happens. But Bambarek does not think that Marx's answer is satisfactory. He thinks that if you just do it empirically instead, and you work from appearance, and you work in an empiricist framework, then you can have a better, more simple theory of price that doesn't require all of this value nonsense as he thinks it is.
I think Andrew at one point even said that, I mean, you could go through Marx's theory and just not use value, and just, you know, because he said value was a mental construct. You could just, you know, explain prices and using, you know, you don't have to reference values.
Productivity. Yeah, we discussed that before, and I think that plugs into what we had been saying about the third thing argument over the course of this. There's one single thing that I want to say about his critique of Postone here. Then we should probably move on.
Please.
It's in the last paragraph of 8.4 on 148, and there's fire footnote 6. So, I suspect that the misplaced emphasis on intentions and method is due in part to the influence of relativism within much of the humanities and social sciences. If our presuppositions fully determine the conclusions at which we arrive, as relativism holds, then the logic of our arguments is irrelevant. Presuppositions lead to conclusions directly, not through logical argument. If that were so, one could bypass the logic of Marx's arguments and acquit him of error by simply explaining where he was coming from. It seems like this is the methodology of Postone's discussion. I don't mean to suggest he's a relativist. His text indicates otherwise. My My point is that simply, if Postone had been working in a different milieu, he might have been more cognizant of the need to respond to the allegations that Marx's arguments are logically flawed. And footnote 6, he delivers the sick burn that, more precisely, reason is a sham. Presuppositions fully determine what is considered rational as well.
That's a footnote.
That is, I mean, yeah, that's a sick burn to hide in a footnote. This is true, though. This is true. I think that the quality and the intentions of the intellectual milieu that these debates tend to be had in, and I don't just mean in academia, I mean in the way that a lot of, autonomous intellectuals like approach these things. This is somehow corrupt, and it's corrupt in a way that they want to make things immediately operational instead of appreciating what's there. People are like, and yeah, not all of this has a direct application right away.
Okay. I'm going to make an executive decision to move on.
Okay.
That's it.
Postone is getting kicked to the curb.
Hey, that's all I wanted to say, Tom. You can cut like the first 10 minutes of me rambling about Postone.
Oh, don't worry, I will. I'm just going to cut the entire episode so far. Wait till we get to the table.
This, I think, is my favorite part, the Borkowitz proof.
Yeah, this is brilliant. Okay, so instead of going through some of the text first, we're going to look at the table and try and get our grasp on the table, I think. And then we can talk through the table about, once we understand the table, maybe what we can discuss what Borkowitz reckoned was going on. How do people feel about that?
Yep.
Let's do it.
Yeah, okay. So let me see. I really, really like this table. This table hurt my head a lot.
Me too.
So, yeah. So we've got Mark's going to set this up into 3 separate departments. We've got, 1 is our means of production department. 2 is our variable capital. So the means of the material elements of variable capital.
Means of subsistence. Means of subsistence.
Mm-hmm.
And 3 is going to be our luxury. So we got 3 things. We got the machines, the food, and the Gucci watch department.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's
Okay.
from volume 2, I think.
Yeah, Marx was into his Gucci's. Oh, so we're going to have a look here. So this is going to be pretty simple stuff this first year. This is just going to be like the tables we did previously. Our constant capital, our variable capital, our surplus. We're going to have the value of the product. Then we're going to use our price of production. We're going to get the average profit that people should get, and we're going to get the total price of the outputs. Okay, so we see after the first year, we've got our price of outputs, the value of outputs of department 1. So our machinery outputs are 400, but the price is going to be 440. Okay, and the reason why
because
they've got a lot of
capital intensive industry.
Capital intensive, just like we see in the previous one. So here we see in this is our food industry, our potatoes, our potato farmer industry, 240 output, a value of output, but because they're using a lot of labor, it's only going to be priced as 220. Okay, it's not capital intensive. And similarly for the Gucci watches, amazingly, it's labor intensive and not capital intensive. Then they're valued at 140. Okay, now the problem that Borkowitz had was that he looked at this output for department 1 of 440, and he said, "Oh, look, that 440. Oh, before we start this table is supposed to be for simple reproduction." Okay, so this is
simple reproduction,
meaning that there is no overall surplus used there's no accumulation in
the
physical
scale of
commodity. In physical commodity.
Yeah, the scale of production stays the same.
Exactly. So what he's saying here is that, look, the price of these output of capital goods here, this doesn't match the value of this doesn't match the 400 that we pumped in at the start of the year. Okay, all the capital goods at the start of the year were 440, but look what's going on over here. The fucking price, now we got 440 of these guys. And similarly, he says, you know, we started with 240 hours of labor. And he goes, look, Jesus, what's after happening here? Now we got 220. And they don't match. And then he says, oh, we started with 160 of stuff of Gucci watches, but at the end we've only got 140. So in simple in simple reproduction, this doesn't work. It's a breakdown. The economy will go to dust.
Well,
Okay.
I think it's important to say that he thought that because the price increases in Department 1, because there is 440 instead of 400, simple reproduction cannot occur because there isn't sufficient demand for the products. And there's too much demand for the for Department 1 and 2 and 3 because their prices fall. So he's saying that they can't be put into use for the next period, or there isn't enough, there isn't enough of them. If you're talking about Department 2 and 3. Correctly. Yeah.
Yeah.
And but this is another one of those things where they mix up price and the physical amounts.
Correct.
Yeah.
So so let's have a look at what Marx would have said or would have happened here. He would say that, okay, so you got this dude here, Department 1 has 440, okay? But what he's saying, at the start of the year, the ratio of prices to values was 1-to-1, okay? So what he's saying now is that these 440 represent 400 units, okay? So each one is going to be worth 1.1. So if he's going to buy 280 units of capital, it's going to cost him 1.1 times 280, which is 308. Okay. Similarly, if he's going to buy, if he needs to buy, well, let's look, and similarly, all of them, that's going to happen. Department 2 needs 88, and Department 4 needs 44. Now they also have to buy their, their
workers.
Their workers. Okay, but the means of subsistence for the workers has gone down by 10%, or gone down by a 12th. Okay, so instead of it costing 72, which is it's going to cost 66, which is 1/12 less. And the 96 is going to cost 88, and the 72 is going to cost 66. So now look, we've got our 440 here as matching the 440 of the price. So the total price of the means of production matches the 440 paid to the Department 1. And the 220 of the variable capital matches the price of the means of production. And now what we've got
is... You mean means of subsistence?
Subsistence, I mean, sorry. Correct. Yeah. Means of subsistence. And now if we look at Department 1, we've got 308 and 66. So that's its capital and the wages. Add them up, you get 374. And you take 374 from 440, and you're left with 66. Okay. And if you do the same with the second department, you get left 44 and 30. But wait a second, this is like the as Marx calls it, the revenue. So basically the stuff that they've got left over after they've produced stuff. And if you add up all those, they total up precisely to the means of the luxury goods, so the Gucci's. So what we have is we have values getting out of whack from the one-to-one relationship with prices. But what we are able to do is reproduce ourselves at the same physical level, but there is changes in prices going on. And if we work through what that means for this year, which is kind of counterintuitive, it means that we increase our rate of profit in value terms, even though on physical terms, we have the same outputs. And the reasoning for that is to do with the setup here, which is the means of production, the means of the means of subsistence get devalued. So the amount of money you have to pay for them, the price you have to pay for them, is smaller. So you get more of a surplus.
I didn't even notice that.
Yeah. So the rate of profit is going up, even though it's in simple reproduction. And that's due to the values. There's just whatever values Andrew decided to pick for this example. If you had chosen the means of subsistence industry to be capital intensive and not labor intensive, you would see the rate of profit drop.
I think it's important that Andrew says that it's not necessary for the prices and the values to be equal at the start and the end of production, but it is necessary for prices of the outputs to equal the prices of the inputs, because when you buy an output, when an output is sold, input is bought, because they happen at the same time. It's simultaneous, because it's two sides of a transaction.
Yeah, so the outputs of end of period 1 is the inputs at the start of period 2, but what we're not doing is equating our outputs and our inputs simultaneously.
Yeah, like from when you buy it after production, at the end of production, they're not the same prices.
I just thought this table was amazing. I just thought this is it. We're seeing 3 departments. We're seeing what happens year after year. We're showing how simple reproduction can happen. If we had an economy with no prices and it was like barter and we had simple reproduction, it can happen. Here's showing how prices and simple reproduction happens. This shows transformation of prices from one period to the next. It shows how it all works, and it totally trashes the basic claim that reproduction can't happen, that the prices and values can't transform. Here it is, a simple example. You may take it 10 or 15 minutes to get your head around it, but it's right there. There's absolutely no refuting this table. I think this is a slam dunk, an absolute slam dunk table.
Oh yeah, I would agree.
and as you said, Pouya, with the output and the input prices, again, Marx states again and again, the capital outlay is given. That's sort of the key. As soon as you do away with Marx's core thing, really, in Chapter 9, which is that capitalists, they buy labor power and they buy means of production on the market according to the price that they were at the point of purchase and at the point of entering production. If you just run with what Marx says you should run with, you can derive this beautiful table. And it all sort of clicks together. But as soon as you think that the capital outlay is somehow calculated after the fact, then it all breaks down.
But I think it. But there was a point Andrew made that was kind of confused me at first, because I thought he was saying the opposite of that, but then I realized he was saying something extremely obvious, was that the output of period 1 has to equal the prices of the input of period 2, because the end of period 1 and the end of period and the start of period 2 are the same time.
Okay, is this that part here? Let me see here. We thus see that equality of input and output prices is not necessary for reproduction to take place or for supplies to equal demands. Since one period's output prices are the next period's input prices, supplies and demands in monetary terms must always be equal whenever supplies and demands are equal in physical terms, no matter how prices may have changed over the production period. This refutation of Borchiowicz's attempted proofs has not in itself been refuted. Has not itself been refuted. Leibman, the only critic of Marx to have addressed it in print, acknowledges that Kleiman and McGlone demonstrated that reproduction equilibrium exists between periods, even though the input and output prices differ. In other words, Borchiowicz's proofs are invalid. Leibman's acknowledgement of this fact, embedded in a mass of objections to temporal valuation, is easy to miss, but it is there.
So,
Like,
I think-
sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I think Andrew like referenced one of the papers he wrote on this. I would really like to read that.
yeah,
Right. Yeah. I think so. Kleiman had this wonderful paper about expanding reproduction, where he does a similar table with two different departments, one producing means of production, and I can't remember what it's called. I don't know if he ever finished it. Only one I've read or skimmed rather is an unfinished version of it. It's blah 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 reproduction as a non-equilibrium blah 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 something something. It's on his Squarespace website, but there's another Marx quote from the same chapter, chapter 9 of volume 3, that I think is a really important conclusion or implication of this exact table.
Manuel, you're just showing off now that you've actually read that chapter. Come on now. Give us a section. What is this section?
Yeah, right.
We get it, Emmanuel. You read the.
Yeah, get it.
We get it.
So
such a
if you
show
could Control F, the transformation of.
The transformation of values into prices. Yo, motherfuckers. I got it.
Here we go. I think this is a super important point from Marx that has to do with this. And he says, or implication rather, the transformation of values into prices of production. So the transformation of values into prices of production, and prices of production here is the price for which the commodity sells on the market. So it's the cost price plus the profit in monetary terms, right? That's what prices of production means in Marx's lingo. So the transformation of values into prices of production serves to obscure the basis for determining value itself. That sentence right there is fucking bomb. Finally, since the mere transformation of surplus value into profit distinguishes the portion of the value of a commodity forming the profit from the portion forming its cost price, that's a mouthful. It is natural that the conception of value should elude the capitalist at this juncture, for he does not see the total labor put into the commodity, but only that portion of the total labor for which he has paid in the shape of means of production, be they living or not. So it doesn't matter to the capitalists, you know, how much is going into machines, how much is going into wages. All that the capitalist cares about is the money I put in, the money I get out, right? So that his profit appears to him as something outside the imminent value of the commodity. So all that the capitalist sees is, I invested 20 million bucks in this enterprise. I derived $1 million profit. He does not care nor see any of the underlying mechanisms behind what's happening. Now, this idea is fully confirmed, fortified, and ossified. I had no idea what ossified means, but
Ossified means oh god, how would I describe ossified? Like something
cleaved?
that's old, no, dead, and that's dried up or something. Ossified.
Right.
Also,
Okay,
it means like formally codified, like in a sort of, I don't know,
Right. Okay.
in a way that suggests it's dusty and old.
Ossification in bone remodel is a process of laying down new bone material by cells called osteoblasts. Osteoblasts.
Okay. Yeah, sure. Cool. We can just run with confirmed that it, you know, it confirms his theory. But yeah, that was really illuminating. It shows part of Marx's genius, I think.
Okay.
In that, from the standpoint of his particular sphere of production, i.e., the particular industry or whatnot, the profit added to the cost price is not actually determined by the limits of the formation of value within his own sphere, but through completely outside influences. So, to the capitalist, you know, there is nothing in the actual investment process, the capitalist to capitalist relation, that would show the capitalist or make it immediate to him in any way that there is any sort of value theory business going on. And it just appears as you know, completely outside influences. But the thing that some of the things that, you know, if I had a highlighter, I would highlight, you know, the portion of the total labor for which he has paid in the shape of means of production, for which he has paid, right? So that implies Mr. Moneybags goes to the market. He pays for means of production, be they living or not. And he doesn't care whatever happens, you know, between the veil of or in the actual factory.
What I want to see is like a theory of like zombie production. Like, can zombies use living labor? It's an intricate one that we haven't discussed yet in the show. Perhaps Andrew should write a title. Maybe Reclaiming the Walking Dead is the next book we do.
Yeah. There you go. All right.
Okay, here. Can we move on to this footnote? Does anybody object? Are you done, Emmanuel, or do you have more to do on that one?
I'm done. It's just another piece of evidence that Marx really just he cares about this. You know, capitalists go to market, they pay a price. That price is equal to the output price of the previous period. That's just, to me, obvious from that quote. Is the point I wanted to carry across.
Well, Emmanuel is in the driving seat today for winning the best panelist of the show so far. So Pouya and Lexi, you're going to have to up your game here. We want some obscure fucking texts that we have to quote. You've got
we could go back and talk about Bombaverk's tautological critique.
Oh God, shut up.
Yeah,
okay.
if we have more time later, maybe if people are interested, we could go more into what Marx means by revenue and why it's important for Marx's main beef with Ricardo, because this is part of this table is actually a refutation of an argument made by Ricardo, and if people care about that, we could go through that, but I'm not gonna. Nah.
Let's keep going for now. I'm not going to say we're not going to do it. If we get time, we'll do it. I just like this footnote here about Leibman's objections. I think this is great. I have, let me just quote this one. I have responded to most of Leibman's other objections in Kleiman objections. In private correspondence, a friend has recently asked about a comment of Leibman's that immediately follows his acknowledgement that reproduction equilibrium exists between periods. Although there is an infinite regress problem in illustrating this, I did not respond to this originally because its meaning was unclear. Liebman may have been repeating an old saw of simultaneism. Temporal evaluation involves an infinite regress, since the input prices of one period depend upon the output prices of the previous period, which in turn depend upon the input prices of that period, and so on. Anyone who agrees with this objection must, to be consistent, object to the notion that the physical inputs of one period depend upon the physical inputs of the previous period, which in turn depends upon the physical inputs of that period, blah, 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 blah.
Physical outputs in the second one.
Oh, sorry. Yes. Sorry. Let me write it again. Object to the notion that the physical inputs of one period must depend on the physical outputs of the previous period, which in turn must depend upon the physical inputs of that period, and so on and so on. You know, this idea that an infinite regress is a problem is baffling. You know,
Yeah.
we live in time. You know, we don't live in a static world. We live in time.
Yeah.
Things
like
have happened
Zeno's
over
paradox.
time.
It's
Exactly.
like Parmenidean arguments against time. It's like, oh yeah, you think time passes? You know, like
Yeah. Wait till I show you. It's crazy to think. I think that Zeno's paradox was only disproved mathematically about 15, 20 years ago, which is kind of insane.
Well,
Some guy came up with a theory of infinitesimals.
Well, yeah, it's basically calculus was this beginning of solution to Zeno's paradox, and that it took thousands of years.
But yeah, so like let's go back. So what have we've gone to that table? I don't think we have to read too much stuff. We've like the last section of this book is quite short. It's the modern simultaneous critiques of Marx's solution. Does anybody want to go through some parts of this?
Not.
I just found that there's nothing really like. Okay,
No,
I think
I'm fine.
I think there's the last little chapter, the last little paragraph. I think is quite good to finish out this chapter, and then we might even actually talk about that Ricardian thing. See how we get on. Okay, so the interpretive practice of those who have called the alleged. Okay, so what am I reading here? This is the last paragraph I'm reading here of chapter 8.6, talking about simultaneous critiques of Marx's solution. The interpretive practice of those who have called the alleged inconsistency in Marx's solution immediately obvious is quite shoddy. Their interpretations make his solution seem not just wrong, but silly, contrary to facts that are self-evident to all. Given this problem, and given Marx's solution had previously been understood very differently, even by its staunch critics, proponents of these interpretations should have abandoned them and searched for more plausible ones. The idea that a serious theorist could commit such ridiculous errors and never notice that his sale and purchase prices differ, or that his value and prices are dimensionally inconsistent, is so implausible that it is sufficient reason to reject these interpretations. Gotta agree with Andrew here. Gotta agree. You know, that table that we did, this multi-sector table and multi-time table of reproduction, simple reproduction, you know, that there disproves prices of production or the value of values into prices, plain as day. And any objections to which are just kind of, they're obstruse.
I really wish Marx had put this table in his in volume 3, because I was so confused on how. I was just wondering, like, when I was reading volume 3 and how reproduction worked with prices of production. This made it very easy and very clear.
Yeah, that's the reason that, you know, people need to try to extrapolate on Marx's work and to try to like systematize it. You know, Engels gets a lot of shit for trying to systematize Marx's work, partially for good reason, but the effort towards doing that is really important, because if we think that the tools are useful, we have to see how they work together.
Yeah. Okay, so Emmanuel, in 1 minute or less, tell us what Marx was trying to do with this table or similar tables to disprove or to prove a point against Ricardo?
All right. Okay. 1 minute or less. Let me. Okay. I'm gonna try my best. Okay. So first, Ricardo said luxury goods don't matter because it's all supply and demand, bro. If you're a maker of limousines, or a maker of Rolex watches, that doesn't really matter at all. It's the same thing as making any other commodity. Marx is calling bullshit. And the way he does that is through a concept that he calls revenue, which is very different from what we today would call revenue. But basically, revenue is, to put it very simply, you say you make T-shirts, and you make T-shirts by buying the raw material cotton, and say that. You as the clever capitalist, you buy cotton at price X, let's say $10 per whatever. But like 3 days after that, there's some sort of crisis of cotton production, and so all of a sudden the price of cotton goes way up. So everyone else who's making T-shirts, they have to buy at this new price. That means that when you finally sell your T-shirts, you can sell them at the same price that everyone else did. But because you bought it for cheap, that means you can pocket the difference. So everyone else has to reinvest all of the bucks that they're reinvesting all of the cash that they got from selling their T-shirts. But you only have to reinvest what is socially necessary. So you only have to reinvest as much as everyone else does. And that means you get to pocket that difference from buying cheap. And that's what Marx calls revenue. So it's sort of a bit of icing on the cake, as it were. It's a surplus above the surplus. Everyone, the surplus value is the same. However, since you bought it for a cheaper price than everyone else, you only need to reinvest as much cash as everyone else does. And that means that you have some money left to spend. And this is what's driving the consumption of luxury goods. Because normal people, workers, etc., very rarely have enough cash to buy a limo. But since you have revenue and all of the other T-shirt makers don't, that means that you can now consume luxury goods. And so Marx's and this is Marx's beef with Ricardo, is that yes, the luxury goods sector is a special case, because if every capitalist reinvested everything and no capitalist could gain revenue, etc., there simply could not be a case in which in the long run, capitalists could buy limos or expensive cigars or expensive wines or whatnot, because the other capitalists are simply going to outcompete you instead of consuming those luxury products, that are going to reinvest it. And so they're going to outcompete you. And that's what Marx kind of shows, is that the luxury goods sector really is a special case, and it requires specific material conditions that shouldn't be possible given Ricardo's actual assumptions. And so that's pretty much the gist of it.
Thanks, Emmanuel.
Yeah, pretty concise. Thank you.
Are we all good now?
Let's see. I guess last thing I'll say is that, without getting too much into Bombardierk and the tautological thing, again, the only objection that I can see to this, because to me, like, it's a question of whether that that equalization of average profit rate thing, when you're just looking at through volume 3, I think If you don't have those aggregate equalities in mind, I think it's a little bit of a jump. But once you're plugging in those aggregate inequalities, if you believe that they hold, as Marx does, then that move makes perfect sense. You're just reapportioning what's there. And so having an average rate, you should be able to get the same number on both sides of the equal sign. Cool. Basically what's interesting about the new objection from Bombaveric around the tautology is that question about commodity money. And to the extent that Marx dealt with it, I don't know if his models have dealt with it. And that's like the only real objection that I still see as not really answered by this. And pretty much everything else is summarily dealt with here. Very like, again, sometimes we complain about, oh, sometimes the book is repetitive, this or that. Like, some of this could be edited into something that is a pretty fine blade that would cut through the majority of arguments regarding the transformation problem being the close of Marx's system. This chapter comes out very strong.
Yeah, I would definitely agree. This is probably one of the strongest chapters in the books. And yeah, some editing could be used, but it's pretty good. I liked it quite a lot.
Yeah, I think in general the book could do with some better editing, as in just structurally it's kind of repetitive in places. And the thing is, though, if you read the chapters in and of themselves, they're not repetitive. But when you construct the book and put 8, 10, 12 chapters together, we keep rehashing the same arguments again. But maybe it's just maybe you have to do something like that when you're doing such a technical book. Maybe you just really do, so that somebody can follow it, because you do forget all these concepts. Okay. Anybody have any other finishing comments before we quit for this evening for chapter 9? Emmanuel,
No, I'm good.
Emmanuel, have we convinced you that it's not as shitty as chapter as you were giving out about before we started?
Well, yeah. So, like, again, to me, the meat of this book is everything is there in chapter 2, and the rest of the book is just Kleiman rubbing it in your face. And to me, this is one of the rubbing it in your face chapters. And it just so happens that if you get things rubbed into your face, you see some things much more clearly. But the sort of general feeling I had, and again, this is nitpicking, and it's an editorial point. But I feel that by this point, Kleiman is restating the same points over and over, and just drilling it down even more to say that if you, for some reason, wasn't already convinced by chapter 2, I'm going to take it point by point, and I'm going to rub every single teeny beeny bit in your face about why you're wrong and I'm right. And I happen to agree that he's right, but I bought that already from chapter 2. So to me, like, most of this is superfluous. Again, with a table in the beginning of the chapter being exactly analogous to a table he has already shown us. Like, I think that could have been done much sooner, and we actually did do it in episode 1 or 2. Everything follows from that, but it's if anything, I'm charging Kleiman with the accusation of being abundantly clear, and repeating himself, which, to be fair, Marx does a lot too.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say.
People get Marx wrong.
That's what I was going to say, is that Marx's writing style, and actually this is sort of endemic to like the Hegelian writing style. It's kind of like a single from a 70s progressive rock album. Like, you hear the chorus so many times, you know what I mean? Whereas if you, like, there's a certain kind of analytical writing that I like that states everything once or twice very clearly and ends up being short, sort of like a very stripped down, you know, pop punk song or something where the chorus appears like once. If you want to hear it again, you just have to listen to it again. Whereas, like, you know,
thing is, Lexi, this isn't a song; it's an album. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah, no, I get it.
It's like there's a whole load of different songs, and all of them are prog rock.
I think you could do a pretty convincing medley in a long song length. That's all I'm saying, and that's all Emmanuel's saying when he's saying that. Excuse me. This chapter is superfluous. He's not saying that there aren't new things introduced here that should have been introduced earlier. You know, like he just wants all that to like come as the concepts flow rather than in the process of dealing with these different topics or aspects. Like I'd like to see the sort of decision tree from the first assumptions and building up from there. That is something like what Marx tries to do in Capital. But again, like I think it could benefit from a more analytical style in the Anglo sense.
I feel like we should play out to like Jive Bunny or somebody. Does anyone remember Jive Bunny?
I don't.
No, I have no idea who that is.
Jive Bunny was like this. It was a phenomenon in England in like the late 80s, early 90s of all of these, a medley of all of these like classic 1940s, 50s rock songs like Let's Twist Again and Rock Around the Clock. And it like sold unbelievable millions of albums and got to like #1 for like half a year.
You want to put some on, Trump?
I don't know how to actually pipe it through properly, so I might put it in the edit. Let me see. Let's see if I can get it. Okay, let me see. Here,
do you have speakers in your room?
Oh, yeah.
Woo!
Oh, yeah.
All right, just give it a minute. It's going to come in now. It's something. What's... Here we go. Ah, no.
Is that the drop?
No, it's going to drop now in a second. It like literally, it just goes on for 45 minutes.
This is great.
Yeah, it's fun.
Ah, Jesus. It's not changing at all. This is the album, or this is not the single.
From now on, when anyone charges Marx of inconsistency, I'm just going to play this track and do a little dance and like...
Like, and give him the Bob Bauer table.
Yeah.
Here we go. Let's see if
the
I got there.
There we go.
Let's try this. Okay, and I'll put it on the share screen. This is the one.
So this is sort of electric swing was a thing.
Yeah.
This is so retro.
That bunny just kind of pops out of nowhere.
Why is it all military? It's all like military stuff in the video.
I think people get the gist of it now. It's kind of like, do you know what it's like? It's like a better version of Puff Daddy.
I don't know. It's all about the Benjamins. Could easily be the soundtrack to the next Marxist movement.
I think so. Jive Bunny it is. Well, let's say goodbye to everybody in the chat before we go. Let's have a look, see who do we have there. I know we have the usual suspects battling it out in here. Who do we have? Oh, let me see. Oh, my God. Let's see.
We even had a link to a Leibman paper, which is fun.
Oh, wow. Okay, so we've antagonist, clown around, data Lord Delatera. Alex has been in there. I think we also had earlier, we had Erica, I think, was there. Anybody else? Lexi, Council Com coming in to say hello.
Dylan, there's 5-star.
Was our antagonist with us this time?
Antagonist has been in there, yeah.
With us.
Dylan
this
was
time.
there, was he?
Yeah.
Okay.
Clowning Around is here. Antagonist linked us to a David Liveman paper. And as Kleinman says, Liveman was at that time of print, basically the only person to really give him the time of day instead of just being like, oh, you can't do that. So that's interesting. I'm glad he linked us that. Let's see. Hey, Sophie. And okay. Yeah, I think that's everyone.
Right, so we'll sign out next week. We'll try and reconvene the same time next week, and we'll do chapter 9, which is a goddamn awful chapter. For me, it's definitely the worst chapter in the entire book. Yeah.
So what makes you say that? Let's talk about that.
Because I think there's a lot of tables in there, and there's a lot of equations in behind them. And, you could go and work them all out, but you get the gist of it. But then there's just so many tables in there saying extremely similar things. And one of the tables is extremely hard to follow, which is 9.5.
So basically what you're saying is that chapter 9 is a microcosm of the whole book?
Some of them a bit, but some of them are a bit kind of random and nitpicky who he takes up.
Oh yeah.
So I guess
critiques of other thinkers.
Yeah.
Here's Mosley, and here's Loringer. He takes on Liebman and Vincian.
As a reader, there's all these tables. Table 9.2. There's 4 tables there. There's one in there's all the tables, two of them in 9.3. There's one in 9.4, and there's some in 9.6. There's 2 more 9.6, and there's more in 9.7. Like all of those tables, the reader is not given the equations to be able to follow, to be able to work them out. Even if you do, I assume you could probably sit down and work them out yourself. You'd have to spend a bit of time trying to figure out what's going on. But it just seems overkill. You know.
So again,
it's just
the book.
What I do like is that it puts a bunch of different put basically a bunch of models right next to each other with all those tables, and kind of lets you really contrast what the model is. And I think Emmanuel's editorial criticism holds up. We could have done this right when we were introducing all these schools, but yeah, I don't know.
For example, I think that if you're doing this chapter, for example, and you're showing these tables to somebody, you should have literally a few pages showing what is the how do you figure out these things. Because the only place that he's actually done that is one footnote in chapter 5 that there's I think it's footnote I'm looking at it now, footnote 8, a 2-liner in chapter 5, and you're getting somebody to read this where you need to help them, and also if you are interested in getting people interested in Marxist economics and understanding the stuff, we should be this is the type of book where it should be put in there. So this I find that with this chapter, where all other tables we've been able to construct and follow the values, apart from the section where there was an error in the actual math, I think in chapter 5, or chapter 3, we did the chaos theory stuff. We've been able to actually calculate everything. But in this chapter, that just breaks down because he doesn't show us, and I just find that a bit of a pain, to be honest with you.
Yeah, it's like after chapter 2 or 3, me and Aiden were talking about this on mute, but after that, Kleiman is like, "You're wrong. and you're wrong, and this critique is wrong, but your critique of that critique is also wrong, and all of y'all are wrong.
That's the game. That's the game.
Right now is just everybody's fucking wrong, and I'm like reading this like, yeah, we got it the first time, you know.
So
All right. So it looks to me like we have about 3 episodes left. We have chapter 9, we have chapter 10, and then I think 11 and 12 seem to,
Go together. Well, 11 is. I'm looking forward to 11. I like 11, and we should probably then do a summation one.
so if
A roundup.
Okay, so we could add some supplemental to 11.
if this were a rap album, the first one would be this beautifully woke, description of the first track that's just like this, absolute piece of art, and then every single one after that is diss tracks.
That's good. That is good.
7-day theory.
I think that's going to be the intro to this episode, Aidan. You nailed that. Yeah. I just want to know, is there going to be any bodies after this album has been released? Are we going to find lightning floating in the water, river, with stab wounds to the neck? Is Mosey going to turn up,
Oh my God.
nailed to a tree outside, his university?
Jeez. I mean, I've been thinking drive-bys, man, but that's gruesome.
Yeah. Drive-bys don't cut it.
Oh, man.
Have you seen Flight of the Conchords?
No.
I know it.
When the manager played by Rhys Darby is like, you can't go out dissing everyone.
Well, one thing. Just a quote there, and it's something that Alex said in the chat. I think is true. We're a bit harsh on the editing sometimes. He says, "This is my first time dealing with a lot of these concepts, so I don't mind the repetition." And to be honest with you, when I do hit the chapters, because you read a chapter and then it's been 2 months since I read chapter 3 or something, and you're doing it actually does refresh you. So I'm not going to slag it that much. But I do think it does. But anyway, let's just say goodbye, and we'll go off air, and we can chat there and slag everybody we want to, and it won't be recorded in public.
All right.
My favorite.
Everyone off the air. Here we go.
Okay, everybody, let's say goodbye.
All right.
Bye.
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 Bye.